We are, by nature, explorers. The same curiosity that sends us to the stars at the speed of thought urges us to go there in reality. And whenever we make a great new leap, we elevate humanity, bring people and nations together, usher in new discoveries and new technologies. So remember to look up at the stars and not down at your feet.
Hello everyone, my name is Richard J. Bartlett, and Ross has asked me to put together a little video presentation for you. So what I decided to do was to walk you through a night underneath the spring stars. So I'm basing this around the night of April 15th, 2021, and I'm actually looking at the night sky at sunset right now from Morecambe. And the reason I chose Morecambe rather than, say, London or somewhere else is just simply because in terms of the United Kingdom, it's actually fairly central. So that's the reason why. So I've actually been to Morecambe, and this doesn't look that much like it. I'm sure there's some nice fields nearby. Yeah, anyway, this software that I'm using is Starry Note Pro, for those of you who are familiar with it. It's one that's actually quite a good little planetarium program. If you are looking to use a free one, then I recommend Stellarium, as most people do. But of course, this one is a commercial piece of software that you can buy. It's pretty neat. It's got a lot of information in there. So this is what we're going to be using. And I'm going to set a time lapse on it so that we can speed through the night within the space of maybe an hour or so, rather than, say, the 10 hours that it would take from dusk till dawn. So right now we have the time set at 8:13 in the evening, which is the time that the sun sets on April 15th at Morecambe. And I'm just going to go ahead and get started right now. So there we go, to set the timer off. So like I said, the time is going at about 15 times the normal rate. So if you were to go outside at about 8:15 on April 15th, then this is more or less what you would see. And the sky is going to look more or less the same from almost anywhere in the UK. It's going to look similar to this. It shouldn't look too much different. Couple of things that I wanted to point out first of all is that, for example, here we had the Pleiades. Now at about 8:20 in the evening, just 5 or 6 minutes after sunset, you're not likely to see these just yet. And you certainly won't see them glowing blue like that. The reason why they look that way in this software is because it's showing you the photographic representation of how the stars would appear. Even through a telescope, you're not going to see them that pretty, but there's going to be a few sites like that will come up that way. Also, way down here, now setting almost below the horizon, is the planet Venus. Now, this right at sunset is very low over the horizon. It's just a couple of degrees or so. You're unlikely to be able to see it unless you're actually able to maybe go out to sea or something from Morecambe. Maybe you've got a flat horizon. You may be lucky enough to see it at that point then. But otherwise, it's going to set pretty soon after sunset. So, for example, right now it's 8:36. It's about 20 minutes after sunset, and already Venus has disappeared. Of course, otherwise, the first thing you'll notice is the moon. And right now it's a waxing crescent phase, which means that it's just about 3.5 days old, I believe, at this point. So if we zoom in on it, this gives us a little bit of an idea of what it might appear or how it might appear through a telescope. So we have, for example, Mare Crisium, which is it's the kind of circular dark area there on the limb of the moon. That's also known as its English name, which is the Seer Crises. Right now is a good time probably to look at the moon in the night sky when it's a crescent phase, between crescent and around first quarter or so, when the moon is about half lit up, because that's when you see the shadows on the moon in the craters at their best, and you get a really good view of the moon, and it looks pretty kind of spectacular. But right now we only have a small percentage of the moon lit up, so if you don't get a chance to actually see it tonight, you'll be able to see it over the next week or so without any kind of problems whatsoever. Let me go back here, and we'll just go back to the regular view. Something else I just wanted to point out to you, some of the bright stars that you might be able to see. So right now it's 8:56 and about 40 minutes after sunset, and we've got the orange red giant star Aldebaran, which is the brightest star in the constellation of Taurus, the bull. Now, Aldebaran is about 150 light years away, I believe, and it's a pretty big star. It's nearing the end of its life. It's the 14th brightest star in the sky, and it's about 400 times more luminous than our own sun. Now, if you was to look at it through binoculars, you would also see that you have this V-shaped cluster of stars known as the Hyades, and these of course represent the head of the bull. So if you was to zoom in right here and take a closer look, you get a good idea of how the cluster might appear through a telescope or through binoculars. So if I zoom in about this much, I should maybe zoom out a little bit actually, because this is probably a good representation of what you might see through binoculars. And the V shape appears here, and you'll also see the moon is nearby as well. So the moon at this stage shouldn't dim the light of the stars too much, but as it gets closer to the full moon, you'll notice that it brightens the sky, and the fainter stars, such as these stars that you have for the Hyades, will more than likely be difficult to see. So again, now is probably a good time to have a look at the Hyades. If I go back to our default view, it is now 9:20 in the evening, and we've got a lot of stars now visible according to our planetarium software. Again, you probably won't see this many stars in reality. It's showing you almost every star you can see right now. But if you was to get away from the lights of the town, then you'd be able to certainly see a lot of stars. The Pleiades, if I go back here, this is, of course, a famous object. It's something that is very popular with observational astronomers, those who look with binoculars and with a telescope. It's also one of the most popular targets for astrophotographers, which is basically what we would see right here. If you was to take a photo of it, this is kind of how it would look. Again, through binoculars or through a telescope, you wouldn't get to see all of this fantastic blue nebulosity necessarily, but it's still a fine, outstanding sight. If you're not sure how to find the Pleiades, of course on April 15th, the moon is relatively nearby, but otherwise you can follow the 3 stars of Orion's belt, and you can trace the line through there to Aldebaran, and then if you kind of curve it around a little bit more, you actually get to the Pleiades right here. Something else to look out for is the planet Mars. So if I highlight that, this is one object that's in the night sky actually will probably appear a little bit brighter. But it's not at its best right now. It was at opposition at, oops, let's center that first. It was at opposition back in October last year, which is really when the planet was at its best. And right now it's getting to be kind of faint, and it's going to be, oops, Sorry, there we go. It's going to be kind of faint, and it's actually getting left behind as the Earth overtakes it in its orbit. So it'll appear small, and it's not going to be at its best in terms of looking at it through a telescope. It won't again be at its best until 2022, next year. I'm not sure of the exact date, but 2021 is unfortunately not a great year for Mars. But if you want to have a look at that, that is also visible for a little while, for a few hours after sunset. So right now it's approximately 9:45, and just zooming back out again. Orion is sinking there. It's pretty low in the west. This might be, if you haven't already looked at it, your last chance to see the Orion Nebula, which is right underneath the 3 stars of Orion's belt. You'll also be able to see, before it sets, the star Rigel, which is another one of the brightest stars in the night sky. Rigel actually is the brightest star in the constellation of Orion, but it's actually been given the designation of Beta Orionis. So the star with the designation of Alpha Orionis is Betelgeuse, which is up here in the corner. Betelgeuse is usually a little bit fainter than Rigel. It's like Aldebaran. It's an orange-red supergiant star. It's nearing the end of its life. It's so huge that if you were to place it at the center of our solar system, where the sun is now, of course, then it would more than likely extend out to the orbit of Mars or Jupiter. Betelgeuse actually has a slight amount of variability to it, so it does kind of change magnitude a little bit, but that kind of went a little bit haywire early last year when for some reason Betelgeuse dimmed, and nobody was quite sure why at first. The current theory is that it actually had an outgassing, if you will, of dark material which actually kind of surrounded a large portion of the star and caused its light to dim. But Betelgeuse is something which is definitely worth looking out for. Also worth looking out for is Sirius, the brightest star in the entire night sky. And again, you can find this by following the 3 stars of Orion's belt. But rather than following the stars up towards Aldebaran, this time you would follow the stars down towards Sirius. Sirius is one of the brightest, one of the closest stars to the sun. It's only about 8 light years away. It's actually 8.6 light years away. Its name means glowing or scorching, and if you was to look at the star when it's at its best, which is usually around January and February in the evening sky, then you would understand where that name comes from, because it's, as I said, the brightest star in the sky. When it's highest, it can actually be quite kind of distracting from the other stars around it. Other stars that you might also notice, I have it at about 10:20 right now in the evening, is this star right here, which is Procyon. Now, this is the brightest star in the constellation of Canis Minor. So Sirius is the brightest star in the constellation of Canis Major, also known as the Greater Dog, and then Procyon is the brightest star in the constellation of Canis Minor, which is the Lesser Dog or the smaller dog. Now these dogs, and if I highlight these constellations here, that's the constellation of Canis Major just kind of sinking there. There we have Canis Minor at the top. These dogs represent the hunting dogs of Orion the Hunter himself. So Canis Minor is a pretty small constellation. It only consists of 2 stars. You have Procyon there, and I'm not sure how you pronounce this one, but Gomisia or Gomisa is the other star that you'll notice. But Procyon is the brightest star. Again, it's a pretty close star to our own, only 11 light years away, and is actually the 8th brightest star in the entire night sky. So not quite as bright as, say, Sirius, which is now sunk below the horizon, but it's certainly noticeable. Looking a little bit further up here towards the a little bit higher above the horizon over the west, we have a couple of constellations from the winter which are still visible but sinking, if you will. Firstly, you'll notice Auriga, the charioteer. This is kind of odd-shaped hexagon shape, and you'll notice the bright star Capella, which should appear kind of yellowish. Capella is also another pretty kind of bright star and relatively close to us. It's actually a quadruple star system, but you won't be able to see the individual stars with binoculars or a telescope. You would actually only be able to kind of so you won't be able to see them at all. They're detectable spectroscopically. In other words, they're not visible at all through telescopes or binoculars in any way. But Capella is also another pretty noticeable star. Over here, you've got the twin stars of Castor right there, and then you've got Pollux right here, and these represent the heads of the twins that go to form up the constellation of Gemini. So Gemini, the twins, again, is another prominent winter constellation. You'll find that these constellations, even though it's springtime, they're now setting in the west after sunset. Castor is a very nice double star for small telescopes, and you can probably split it with a magnification of about 100 times or so. You'll notice that there are two bright white stars that make up this one single star. So Castor actually in all is a system of 6 stars. And again, kind of like Capella, you won't be able to see them all with just your eye, but you will be able to detect them if you had the proper equipment. So Castor is right there. Pollux, nothing much that's notable about Pollux. It's actually the brighter of the two stars. Let me check that. Yeah, it's just slightly brighter than its twin Castor right here. But otherwise, there's not much of actual kind of note for Pollux. One thing I did want to highlight in Gemini is the open star cluster Messier 35. So that lies down by the feet of the twins. And I center this. This is a pretty nice site for binoculars and telescopes. So this is actually one cluster that's pretty easily seen under fairly light polluted skies. You'll be able to see it from suburban skies. You can pick it up in binoculars, but the best views come in a small telescope or any telescope with a low magnification. It's definitely one of my favorites. So if you get a chance before it gets too late into the year, it's visible probably until about June, but that's definitely worth checking out. If I go back out again, so there's the feet of Gemini, if you will. I wanted to quickly talk about Perseus as well. So Perseus was the hero in Greek mythology that rescued Andromeda. And there's one star cluster that's worth checking out with binoculars. So we have Alpha Persei here, which is also known as Murphag. And if I center that and then zoom in a little bit, what we have is a star cluster that actually surrounds that star. So all of these bright stars here are known as the Alpha Persei cluster, and it's actually a pretty neat cluster to see in binoculars. It's a little bit too big actually for a telescope, because you really only need a magnification of perhaps about 10 times or so. once you start getting into the magnification that you might have with a small telescope, like 30 times, 35 times or so, then you'll probably find that the entire cluster won't actually fit within the field of view. So check it out with binoculars, definitely worth a look. Let me just zoom back out again now. According to our software, the time is now coming up on nearly midnight. So I'm just going to pause it really quick so we can have a quick look around and put the constellations back on here. There's Gemini, that's not going to set for a couple of hours. Cancer is one of these constellations which really kind of comes into prominence around late winter, around February time or so. So depending on your point of view, you might consider it a spring constellation, or you might consider it a winter constellation. It's not actually an easy constellation to spot just because its stars are pretty faint. But if I just kind of turn the constellations off for a moment here, if you look between the stars of Gemini, we've got Castor and Pollux right here, and Regulus over here in Leo. In the middle, somewhere around here, is where you'll actually find Cancer. And it's actually the central part of it is made up of these 4 stars here. So if I turn the constellations back on, at the center of Cancer, excuse me, is another star cluster. Again, it's a very popular target with astronomers, and that's the Beehive cluster. And let me just center and zoom in with this. Again, this is an outstanding object in binoculars, probably one of the best open star clusters that you're likely to be able to see in binoculars. Really what you have here on this planetarium software doesn't do it justice. One thing that always kind of stands out to me is this little group of stars right here in the center, which to me always forms a pattern similar to the constellation of Cepheus, the king. That's an autumn constellation. It might become a little bit better seen perhaps towards the dawn, but we may come back to that a little bit later. And there's one other star cluster. Might be easier if I just did this. In Cancer, which is Messier 67. And let me just center in on that. You'll find that down by the foot of the crab, which is represented by this star here, Acubens. Now, this cluster isn't nearly as good as the Beehive cluster, but under dark skies, you could probably spot it with binoculars, but otherwise it's probably best seen with telescopes. It's, I mean, I wouldn't say it's a showstopper, but it's certainly worth looking out for. Okay, so just zoom back out here again. I'm gonna restart our clock. We are now looking towards the southwest. So actually, I won't restart the clock just yet because I did want to just mention about Leo. So constellation of Leo the Lion. Its brightest star down here is the star Regulus. Again, another fairly close star to us. It's only 79 light years away, which helps to make the star stand out in our night sky. And if I turn the constellations off here, that's Regulus right here. You can actually trace an outline of a backwards question mark with these stars right here, or if you want to consider it as a sickle, that's another way of looking at it. But Regulus is pretty easily seen. If you're looking for a binocular target and a target that's also good, well seen in telescopes, then I would recommend Algebra. And let me see if I can get this centered and magnified. So this is a great double star for both binoculars and a telescope. So we zoom in a little bit here, you'll see actually that we have a bright yellowish star right here, and we've got a slightly fainter whitish star, also known as 40 Leonis, and this pair is visible easily in binoculars. But if you zoom in even more, and I'm not sure if it will let me do it, if you look at it with a small telescope, and if memory serves, you might need to kind of crank up the magnification here. Yeah, it's not really going to split it. But if you increase the magnification enough, you're probably looking at requiring over 100 times magnification. You should be able to split the star in two. And what you'll see are two stars of almost equal brightness. And they should appear a kind of golden white color. Definitely worth looking out for. Very pretty double star. And let's go back to the default view. So nearly midnight already, and looking towards the southwest, did want to put the constellations back on here. Did also want to highlight the constellation of Hydra. Now there's a lot of deep sky objects in this constellation. This, as you can see here, is a pretty long constellation. It's actually the longest constellation and the largest constellation in the entire night sky. It takes up more area than any other constellation. It's kind of hard to trace the entire pattern of the constellation, especially from northern skies, because even as it's over the southern horizon here, it's fainter and more southerly stars barely kind of escape the horizon, so it's going to be pretty tricky to see the whole thing. You should, however, be able to pick out the head of the of Hydra, which you'll find just below Cancer and just a little way down to, from Leo. So that's an asterism, or a group of stars that's worth looking out for. Couple of other things here. We've got Taurus and Crater. Not a huge amount to see here, but I did want to just talk about the legend of Corvus and Crater for a few moments. The story goes that Corvus, the crow, was a pet, if you will, of the god Apollo, and one day the legend says that Apollo was thirsty, so he sent the crow to get him a goblet of water. So the crow went off and fetched the water for the god, but the crow was also thirsty and drank the water himself. So by the time he got back to Apollo, all the water was gone, and the god was so enraged by this that he basically threw the cup into the sky and transformed the bird into stars, and they both ended up in the night sky as a result, which is why you might find them pretty close together there over the southern horizon at about midnight. Also around this time, if we go over to the north, and look up, you'll see the constellation of Ursa Major pretty much overhead, literally directly overhead right there. Oops, just flipped it around actually. So this is how you would see it if you were facing towards the south, I believe, and looking upwards. Now you're probably familiar with the plough, which is these 7 brightest stars right here. And you're also probably familiar with the idea of, oops, it's twitching a little bit, we'll use this, following the pointer stars here to get to Polaris, the North Pole star, which is also the brightest star in the constellation of Ursa Minor. So Ursa Minor is the Little Bear, Ursa Major is the Great Bear. I mention this just because you can also use Ursa Major, let me actually just do this, might be easier, to find other constellations in the sky. So if you can find the plough, and right now we're kind of looking towards the south again, you can follow those same two stars downward, instead of going north towards Polaris, you can follow these two stars downward and you'll reach the constellation of Leo and at some point Regulus as well. You can also use the handle of the plow. If you follow the curve, you'll come down to this star right here, which is Arcturus. Arcturus, another bright star, is also a red giant like Betelgeuse and Aldebaran. And again, it's pretty close by. It's only just under 37 light years away. It's the fourth brightest star in the entire night sky and is actually the brightest star in the northern celestial hemisphere. So Sirius, by the way, lies in the southern celestial hemisphere. It's the brightest star in the constellation of Boötes, and yes, that is actually how you say it, not Bootes, also known as the herdsman. It's a little bit unclear as to why he's called the herdsman, other than the story goes that he actually was herding the bear, but Ursa Major. I'm not sure why you'd want to herd bears, but there you go. Now, if you follow the curve, whoops, let's get rid of that. If you follow the curve of the Dipper down even further, past Arcturus, then you come down to the constellation of Virgo, the Virgin, and another bright star, which is Spica, or Speaker. Never found out really what's the correct pronunciation there. But Spica, again, brightest star in the constellation, and this is also another relatively nearby star. It's, well, I say relatively nearby, it's 250 light years away, which is pretty much on our doorstep, cosmically speaking, and it's the 10th brightest star in the sky. Now, this star, as you'll see here, it states that the star is a double star. You can't split it with a telescope, but these two stars are actually so close that they orbit one another in just 4 days. So they're way too close to actually be able to be seen with a regular telescope. Most stars actually in the night sky are multiple stars in some way. Virgo and the constellation just to the north of it here, Coma Berenices, this area here is rich with galaxies. Any hardcore astronomer loves spring if they're into hunting galaxies, because this is basically when they're at their best. There are far too many galaxies for me to kind of highlight. I mean, there's literally thousands of potential targets here. If you wanted to spend the rest of your life hunting galaxies, then this is the time of year to do it. I did more kind of want to focus on things that you could easily see with binoculars and a small telescope. And one of those things, for binoculars anyway, is the Coma Berenices cluster. And you can kind of just about see it here. Coma Berenices, which is known as, also known by its English name of Berenice's Hare, is a pretty faint constellation. Now, it's not an easy one to kind of pick out, but if you want to be able to find the Coma star cluster, this group of stars right here, the best thing to do is look for the nebula, which is the star that marks the tail of Leo the Lion, and then look upwards for this star right here, which is Cor Caroli, also known as Charles's Heart. This star isn't that far away from the stars of the plow. This star, for example, Alcade, is the last star at the end of the handle of the plow. So if you look about midway between the nebula and Cor Caroli, you'll find the Coma star cluster, which is right about here. And again, this is a nice view in binoculars. It's too large really for small telescopes, but you'll notice that it has, especially when the cluster is at its highest over the southern horizon, it has a kind of upside down Y shape, or like a wishbone shape. If you do happen to have a telescope, you might want to look out for this galaxy right here, NGC 4565. And again, if I center this and then zoom in on it, This is an edge-on galaxy, so you might be able to pick it out in small telescopes, but chances are you'll probably need something reasonably large, like at least 10 inches or 250 millimeters in aperture, to be able to really appreciate it. Under good seeing conditions, you should be able to pick out the dark dust lane that cuts across the center of its disk there. Let me zoom back out again, and we'll start the clock again. So again, around about midnight, I did also want to mention to you, if I switch the constellations back on, I mentioned Cor Caroli. This is a very nice double star for small telescopes. Again, you probably need a magnification, if I remember correctly, of about 60, 70 times maybe, but you can split that star with a small telescope and it appears as two creamy colored stars. If different star colors are your thing, then check out Libra, which is at this time just shortly after midnight. It's rising over the southeastern horizon. It's not a constellation that's going to rise very high, but if you want to test your eyesight, if you will, look out for Beta Librae, which is actually a greenish colored star. Now, technically, you don't have greenish stars. The stars don't have the correct chemical composition for that. But Beta Librae is a star that, to human eyes, if you will, actually does have a greenish appearance. It doesn't happen for everyone, but have a look and see for yourself. Nearby is Alpha Librae, which is this star right here. And this is also actually a good double star. It's an easy double star for binoculars. And being a fairly wide double, it's not a star that looks that great in telescopes. It's really just best seen with binoculars. So if I zoom in, and by the way, these moving little dots right here, they're satellites. Again, we're moving through time at a fairly rapid pace, so it's now almost 12:30 in the morning. But this is, let's see if I can get it a little bit closer in. This, like I said, is Alpha Librae, and it's a nice double star for binoculars. All right, so let's go back out again. By now, 12:30 in the morning, we've got the stars of summer rising in the east. Turn the constellations back on. If you look over to the northeast, you've got the constellations of Lyra, Cygnus rising, and shortly you'll have Aquila rising over here. We'll come back to that in just a little while, but I wanted to mention about Vega right here, because if you look about midway, maybe a little bit more than that, between Arcturus and Vega, then you'll have these constellations in the center. Corona Borealis is also known as the Northern Crown. It's doesn't really have a lot in terms of deep sky objects for you to see, but you should be able to pick out its brightest star, which is Alphecca. Not sure what that means, but it's basically the jewel in the Northern Crown. If you look then between Alphecca and Vega, you may be able to pick out the constellation of Hercules. In particular, look out for these four stars right here that make up the keystone, the center, the body, if you will, the torso of Hercules. Now, right here, kind of around this area, is Messier 13, or the Great Hercules Cluster. And this is pretty easily seen in binoculars. You may even be able to see it under pretty dark skies if you've got good eyesight. This is a globular cluster. So what that means is that it's basically spherical, and it's almost like a huge sphere of stars containing hundreds of thousands of stars. Globular clusters surround the Milky Way. Just trying to get it to the center on it. Actually, let's pause this. Here we go. Now, again, kind of like the Pleiades, it doesn't look quite like this through binoculars or a telescope. Through binoculars, you'll probably see a small hazy patch. However, telescopes really do bring it out quite substantially, and it can appear quite stunning even through a small telescope. If you crank up the magnification to over 100 times or so, you'll start to see the individual stars within the cluster, and more interestingly, you will notice that there are chains of stars coming out from the center of the cluster. And this photo doesn't really do it justice, if only because when you have astrophotographs like this, the way that the exposure, the way that the image is taken, with the exposure lasting potentially several hours, it brings out a lot of stars that you wouldn't normally see through a telescope. So as a result, those chains of stars that you would see through a telescope really kind of get lost among all the other stars that appear in the image. But to me, when you look at Messier 13 through a telescope at about 100 times or so, 150 times, those chains of stars really give me the impression of almost like a little sea creature at the bottom of the ocean. It like it's got tentacles or something. It's definitely one that sparks the imagination. So if you've got a telescope and you haven't seen it already, that's definitely one that you want to check out. There are a bunch of other globular clusters visible around this time of year as well, especially during the summer. For example, we also have Messier 92 in Hercules, but there's few that actually stand out as well as Messier 13. So Messier 92 is in the northern kind of portion of the constellation, and it can be a little bit kind of tricky to actually locate because of there's no immediately bright stars nearby. Something else I wanted to highlight to you, we have the constellation of Draco, the dragon. Now this constellation kind of circles the pole. So we have Ursa Minor here, we've got Polaris, the pole star, and if you was to stay out all night and you found Draco, then kind of like the plow, you would notice that it would actually circle around the pole as the hours go by. And now, kind of like Hydra, this is a fairly long, winding constellation, but there's one star here which is a particular favorite of mine for binocular observers. And it looks pretty nice under low magnification in a telescope too, and that's Nu Draconis, also known by its name of Coma. It's K-U-M-A. This is a fairly wide double star. So if we zoom in a little bit, might need to zoom in a little bit more. There you go. It's two stars of equal brightness, two white stars. And again, if you look at this through binoculars, it's a very easy split. It's a nice star actually, very easily kind of found as well. So I always have a look at that when I go outside. And of course, the good thing about it being in the constellation of Draco, with the constellation being circumpolar and basically spinning around the pole star all night, it's pretty much visible at almost any time of year as well. All right, so returning now to the eastern horizon, and we now have the time at about 2 a.m. We've got about 4 hours, I believe, until sunrise. We've got the star Vega here. We've also got the star Deneb, which marks the tail of the Cygnus the Swan, and we've also got Altair, which marks the head of Aquila the Eagle, and these three stars make up the Summer Triangle. These are three pretty prominent stars. Lyra is pretty, Vega is pretty close at only about 25, 26 light years away. Oops, let's get rid of that. And Deneb over here, where the tail of the swan is. Deneb is actually one of the most luminous stars known. It's thought to be somewhere in the region of about 2,000 times more luminous than the sun, and at quite a substantial distance. I'd have to briefly look up its distance, actually. Let me see. She might tell me if I hold my mouse over it. There we are. So its distance is actually 3,262 light years, and it is thought to be about 200,000 times more luminous than the sun. It would have to be in order to appear that bright in our night sky at that distance. Because all of the other bright stars you see here, like Vega, as I mentioned, Arcturus, these stars all lie within about 50 light years or so, which is why they appear so bright to us. Deneb is thousands of light years away and hundreds of thousands of times brighter than the sun. Going back to Lyra, there's another really neat double star here. That's a really cool sight in both binoculars and telescopes. And we zoom in on this. It's also known as Epsilon Lyrae, or the double-double. Now, with just your eyes, you should be able to notice that there are two stars here. Binoculars will also show this quite nicely, and you'll see two stars kind of as you do right here. However, if you look with a telescope, and not sure if I'll be able to simulate this or not, but if you look with a telescope, again, you'll probably need a comparatively high magnification. Whoops, and it's not doing it. Okay. Probably need a fairly high magnification of around 150 times or so. You'll notice that each of those two stars is also split in two. So you've actually got a double star, hence its name. And all four stars are more or less the same brightness, and they are all white. So it's almost like quadruplets, almost. Another object to look out for is the famous Ring Nebula. You may be able to pick it out in binoculars. It appears right between the two stars at the bottom of Lyra. However, you really need to get a telescope to appreciate this one. Again, you don't need a large telescope. It can be something relatively small. I can easily pick it out in a 3-inch refractor, for example. It won't look this great, but you will notice a small gray disk at first, and once you increase the magnification, it actually kind of looks a little bit like this, but gray. You'll notice a very small gray smoke ring in space, and it's actually a really cool thing to be able to see. So now we're at 3 a.m. in the morning, and let me zoom out, get rid of this sidebar. About 3 hours before the dawn, Albireo, also known as Beta Cygni, this marks the head of the Swan. This is a famous double star. I'm not really going to zoom in on it because I don't think the software will really do it justice. But a low-powered magnification eyepiece and a small telescope is all that you'll need, probably about 30 times or so, maybe even a little bit lower, to split this star in two. And you'll notice that there are two bright components to the star. There's a brighter golden star, and then there's a slightly fainter sapphire-colored star. So you've got gold and deep blue there, and it's a really nice color contrast. Famous double star for astronomers during the summer months. And actually, Lyra, Cygnus, these two constellations, and Vega and Deneb particular, they also are circumpolar, so they never technically actually set. But you'll want to really make the most of the summer months. Those are the best times to actually observe objects in those constellations. But in theory, you can certainly see these until late autumn. One other thing I wanted to highlight to you, actually there's two things here I wanted to show you. And I'm going to pause it really quick because it's, actually no, we can carry on. It's nearly 3:30 in the morning now by our extended clock. But if you're looking for a neat, technically not a star cluster, but a neat asterism group of stars to see with binoculars, then you can look at the coat hanger. Now, this really does look like the object it's supposed to represent. So, right, uncheck this. You can see you've got the base of the coat hanger right here. These stars right here, and there's your hook. And again, this is a nice object for binoculars. You don't need to have a lot of power, a lot of magnification to pick it out. And it's actually something that you could even spot with the naked eye. Again, it's not really a cluster that's best seen in telescopes because of its size. But if you wanted to try your luck, then you would need your lowest magnification. I mean, if you can get an eyepiece that has a magnification of only 20 times or so, then that would be your best bet. I also wanted to point out to you the Dumbbell Nebula. And this can be a little bit tricky to find at first, but it's worthwhile hunting down and tracking if you can. So if I center this, you'll notice that it appears pretty close to the relatively bright stars of Sagittarius, the arrow right here. And you can spot it with binoculars. However, you won't see a great deal. You might just see a small gray disk. And let's zoom out a little bit here. Again, you won't see it quite like this, but through a small telescope, it appears as actually a reasonably large gray, almost elliptical disk. And to me, I mean, it does look like a dumbbell, but it also kind of resembles an apple core, or even if you use a little bit of imagination, the bat signal of all things. Again, observational astronomy is a case of using your imagination as much as anything else. So have a look and see what that looks like to you. So we're now at almost 4 a.m. and we've got the stars of autumn rising over here in the northeast. Delphinus is actually a neat little constellation to kind of look out for, by the way. You'll find that close to Aquila. Over here, though, where we have the autumn constellations rising, you have Pegasus, the flying horse. Not necessarily an easy constellation to pick out in its entirety, but you could certainly pick out the square of Pegasus once that rises a little bit higher. You'll also perhaps want to look out for Messier 15, which is another globular cluster which lies close to the star NF right here. And let me get that centered in. I haven't been able to spot it with binoculars, but you can under decent skies. You probably won't be able to do it from suburban skies, but it's certainly visible from suburban skies with telescopes. So it's not as grand as the globular cluster in Hercules, but it's visible. You'll be able to pick it out. And if I deselect that, go back to our view here. over more towards the northeast, you have the constellations of Cassiopeia and Andromeda. Cassiopeia is another circumpolar constellation. Depending on where it is in relation to the pole star, it will either appear as a W, as an M, as the number 3, or as the letter E. So right now it's kind of as a W shape. So as it turns around the North Pole star, Polaris, you will see that its shape will actually, or its appearance will change a little bit. Its shape stays the same, but it will appear either as a W, as an M, as an E, or the number 3. Cassiopeia has some cool kind of clusters in it. My favorite perhaps is NGC 457, which is also known as the Owl cluster or the ET cluster. You can pick this out in binoculars, but really, again, it's best seen actually with a small telescope. So when you look at it at a low magnification of about 30 times or so, you can see here it actually appears upside down, but you'll be able to see these two stars, and then you'll be able to see the body, if you will, of the owl or of ET, and then you'll see some stars over here and over here, which actually represent the stars, so the wings of the owl. Or again, if you use a little imagination, it'll appear to be almost like the arms of ET, the extraterrestrial, almost like he's kind of walking towards you, giving you a hug. So that's also definitely worth looking out for. It's rising in the early hours of the morning, but you might, if you're interested, make a note of it for the autumn when it's better seen. You'll also want to look out for the double cluster, which technically is in Perseus, which is now rising again over in the northeast. So I'm not sure if it will come up this way. Double cluster. There we are. So it's about midway between Cassiopeia and the edges, if you will, of Perseus. If you follow the two stars here down towards Merfac, the brightest star in Perseus, it's not quite halfway there. And this is a cluster, or sorry, two clusters that are pretty nicely seen in binoculars. If you have a telescope, then they do fit within a low-powered field of view, but you probably won't want to increase the magnification too much because you'll lose sight of them both. Usually with binoculars, usually with a small telescope, you'll be able to see them both within the same field of view at a reasonably low magnification. But once you start increasing it past about 75, 80 times or so, you'll only be able to see one of the clusters at any one time. And again, this image doesn't really kind of do it justice, but you've got one cluster here and you have one cluster there. And again, with binoculars and a telescope, you'll actually be able to see more stars than you can actually see right here. It's now 5 o'clock in the morning and it's about an hour before the dawn. You'll notice that if you look towards the south and the southeast, the stars of summer are at their highest, if you can call it that. Unfortunately, the constellations of Scorpius, which is what we have right here, and Sagittarius don't rise very high above the southern horizon. I'll turn off the constellations really quick because here we have Antares, again, kind of like Betelgeuse, like Arcturus. This is an orange-red supergiant star. It's pretty large. It's about the same size as Betelgeuse and Orion. If you was again to place it at the center of our solar system where the sun is right now, it would probably stretch out as far as Mars or Jupiter. It's a shame actually that you can't see Scorpius in its entirety from the United Kingdom, because it does have some really cool star clusters. You might be able to pick out Messier 4, which lies close to Antares. But given its altitude above the horizon, it's going to be tricky. And if you live near a town or a city, then you may find it challenging. This is a globular cluster, and like I said, it's going to be tricky even with binoculars, but you may be able to pick it out with a telescope. Again, not quite as fine as Messier 13, but if it rose higher, it'd certainly be worth having a look out for. If you're away from the country, away from the town, and you're looking at the night sky a little bit later in the year, around the summertime, when the summer constellations are really at their best, you may also be able to pick out the Milky Way, which is this gray area right here. Right now, April 15th, or technically April 16th, 5:45 in the morning, it's going to be over the southern horizon at about this time. Constellation of Sagittarius, you have this teapot shape right here. If you look towards Sagittarius, you're actually looking towards the heart of the Milky Way galaxy, some 22,000 light years away off the top of my head. But again, like some of the other more southerly sites, it's not very well seen from the UK. Your best bet if you want to look at the Milky Way is to look a little bit higher overhead and look out for the constellations of Cygnus, because you can see the Milky Way streaming basically down through Cygnus and then down through Aquila. So now 5:56. The sun actually should be brightening. The sky should be brightening. I'm not sure why it isn't. Because technically, actually now it's kind of 6 o'clock. We're only just a few minutes away from the dawn. So not sure why the sky didn't brighten here, but anyway, before the dawn, you'll be able to see Jupiter. That rises, let's see here, at 4:40, so probably about an hour and a half before sunrise. Might be best to go outside and have a look about an hour before the sun comes up. And then you've got Saturn over here as well, a little way over towards the west. Saturn is the fainter of the two. Jupiter, if you get a chance, again, worth looking at through a telescope. Binoculars will show the 4 largest moons, but these 2 planets will be at their best later in the year, around late summer, around August time or so. But they're just beginning to become visible now. Come back in a couple of weeks or so, around May 5th, I believe, and you should be able to see the moon nearby. It'll appear as a crescent in the early morning sky. So yeah, around May 4th and May 5th, sometime around 5 a.m. or about an hour before sunrise, then the moon will appear close to Jupiter and Saturn. So again, not quite sure what happened to the daylight here, but you can see the sun's nearly rising. So realistically, probably about an hour and a half before the sun is when the sky starts to brighten. So just kind of bear that in mind, because really you want to try and get your stargazing, if you will, done probably before 3 a.m. in the morning, maybe 4 a.m. But that's it. That's what you can see throughout the night on April 15th, the spring stars. If you have any questions at all, you're more than welcome to email me. My email address is astronomywriter@gmail.com. And as the email address implies, I do write my own astronomy books, which you can find on Amazon. But if you're looking to get some free PDF copies, then I can always pass those along and post them in the UK Astronomy group. Or if you want to email me, I'll be happy to send you a link where you can download some. But in the meantime, thanks for watching, and have a great night.